Last October of 2023, and yep, I can't believe it's 2024 already either, but last October a research paper was published in a peer-reviewed journal, Archaeological Prospection, titled Geoarchaeological Prospecting of Gunung Padang Buried Prehistoric Pyramid in West Java, Indonesia. Authored by indigenous Indonesian geologist Hillman Natawidjaja et al., or with others, it describes the work conducted on the little-known site in the jungle of Indonesia from October 2011 until October 2014, a decade ago now, which should give you an idea on just how slowly the wheels of the peer review process can grind at times. The findings reported in this paper are frankly extraordinary, as Hillman and his team conclude that based on their integrated, multi-method approach that included trenching, core drilling, carbon dating, ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity tomography, and seismic tomography, the structure at Gunung Padang is a man-made pyramid, likely with internal chambers, built over multiple periods of occupation and construction, its oldest layers going back an astonishing 27,000 years, to a time tens of thousands of years before any known ancient civilization. You'd think that a paper like this, detailing years of solid scientific work, should have resonated through the archaeological establishment like an earth-shattering kaboom, similar to the findings at Göbekli Tepe, but that's certainly not what happened.
Where's the kaboom? There was supposed to be an earth-shattering kaboom.
Instead, and perhaps unsurprisingly to some, it was met with a majority of silence, or if not that, then criticism and derision.
You can almost hear the snorts of derision.
So let's get into the details here. What exactly was found at Gunung Padang by Danny Hillman with his years of work on the site? Should this paper and this remote, rarely seen site in the jungles of Indonesia be considered another piece of evidence for a seismic shift in our understanding of human civilizations on this planet? Or is there validity to the backlash and criticism that has formed the primary response from archaeologists? My name is Ben, and this is Uncharted X. In this video, we're going to dive into the details and history of the enigmatic ancient site of Gunung Padang, and get into the controversy surrounding Hillman's paper and the response to it from the archaeological establishment. Before we get started, a quick update on upcoming events, and this is chapterized if you want to skip ahead. There are still a few spots available on my very shortly upcoming Special Permission Egypt tours in both February and March of this year. If you want to check out the amazing sites of Upper and Lower Egypt with special permission access into a bunch of places and a 4-night Nile cruise, all of the details are on my website, unchartedx.com. I'll also be speaking at the Eclipse at the Canyon event this April in Texas. 3 nights of camping, the full totality of the solar eclipse, live music from the likes of $50 Dynasty, other great speakers, and even some stand-up comedy. It's going to be a good time, and if you're interested, check out the link below in the description. Also, I'm happy to say that I'll be returning to the Cosmic Summit Conference in 2024, June 15th and 16th at the Sheraton in Greensboro, North Carolina. The speaker lineup has expanded this year, and it promises to be an excellent event. Check out the link below in the description for all of the details and tickets. Lastly, in channel news, I'm doing weekly live streams over on Rumble, usually on Fridays or Saturdays if you want to catch me live. And I've also set up a locals page for those who want to support my channel through the value for value model. And again, all of the links to those are below in the video description. The site of the Gunung Padang Pyramid is located around 120 kilometers to the south of Jakarta, about 3 hours drive, on the western end of the island of Java, one of the many islands that makes up the archipelago of Indonesia. You can drive to the entry site, or you could also take a local scooter from one of the villages if you want to spice it up a bit with a 2-wheeled, 4-legged Indonesian Uber. Last I heard, the entry ticket was around the equivalent of 20 US cents. It's not exactly a global tourism phenomenon, and mostly the site is visited by local Indonesians. I should say that I've not been to the site myself, although I plan to get there in the next couple of years. This footage was all taken by my partner in an earlier channel, as well as some other friends of mine from a visit to the site in 2017. Entering Gunung Padang, you'll find yourself on the terraces that form the top of the pyramid-like structure. The architecture here is all formed by columnar andesitic basaltic rock, usually just called columnar basalt. Columnar basalt can form in almost perfect hexagonal chunks, or it might have 3, 4, 6, or 7 sides. This occurs under specific conditions of heat and pressure. As lava under these conditions cools, it cracks in somewhat uniform lines, forming columns of stone. You can find columnar stone like this all around the world, and there are some well-known examples, like Devil's Tower in Wyoming, made from huge columnar runs of phonolite. You can also find layers of columnar basalt in the spectacular channeled scablands of eastern Washington state, part of the huge plumes of lava laid down millions of years ago from the same caldera that is today beneath Yellowstone National Park. At Gunung Padang, the terraces are constructed with cut blocks of columnar basalt and are built on top of the pyramid-like structure, about 100 metres high from the parking lot, which is accessed via a stone staircase. The whole thing is about 200 metres above the main river to the north. There are 5 terraces, the largest of which is 30 metres wide and 40 long. Quoting from Danny Hillman's paper, quote, Terrace T1 spans 30 by 40 metres and is separated from Terrace 2 by a 9 metre high ramp. The terraces are divided by 50 centimetre steps between Terrace 2 and Terrace 3 and Terrace 3 and Terrace 4, while a 1 metre step separates Terrace 4 and Terrace 5. The exteriors and interiors of the terraces are adorned with alignments of rock walls and rows of standing columnar rocks, forming intricate spatial patterns and geometries. In 2014, the vegetation on the east slope was cleared to reveal these stone terraces. However, they have since become heavily vegetated once again. The National Archaeological Institute conducted studies that led to the site's restoration in 1985, and in 1999, Gunung Padang was designated a provincial-level cultural heritage site. Previous studies regarded it as a significantly large megalithic site consisting of stone terraces, known as Punden Berundak, which are common in Indonesia but not on the same scale as Gunung Padang. Further archaeological studies were carried out until 2005, including limited excavation pits that reached less than a metre deep. While lacking radiocarbon dating, it was assumed that Gunung Padang was a prehistoric site built between several hundred and a couple of thousand BCE, following regional megalithic cultures in Asia. A comparative example of stone terraces is Lebak Sebidug, a stepped pyramid close to Gunung Padang, which shares a similar size and antiquity but has not been extensively studied. Another example is Candi Kethek in central Java. Stone terraces constructions can be found worldwide, such as Machu Picchu in Peru, built by the Inca civilization. Nan Madol, a megalithic complex on Pohnpei Island, Micronesia, utilizes similar columnar joint rocks. End quote. So on top, at the stone terraces, the architecture of Gunung Padang matches other known ancient sites of Indonesia and others in Asia. But, as Hillman states, it's really only these top terraces that have been studied, with below-ground investigation limited to less than a metre in depth. Danny Hillman's work on the site has taken this early investigation much further, and, if you'll excuse the pun, to much deeper levels. His team found that Gunung Padang has a much more complex and far older history, with multiple phases of construction in very different styles, in different layers hidden beneath the terraces on top. These different layers of different construction styles are dated to very different periods of time separated by thousands of years, and they're categorized by Hillman as different units, with Unit 1 being the terraces on top. Quote, the visual observations at Gunung Padang reveal a complex construction history, with evidence of multiple phases and diverse architectural styles. At the ground surface, known as Unit 1, the prominent megalithic stones exhibit a variety of arrangement techniques positioned on soils containing numerous andesitic rock fragments. Unit 1 comprises columnar rock arrangements of standing rocks and ramps, defining the spatial geometry and terrace spaces. Beneath Unit 1 lies an older layer of columnar rocks displaying much more sophisticated construction techniques. These regularly cut columnar rocks are arranged like bricks in a building, with fine-grained fillers or mortar between them. This layer, called here as Unit 2, remains hidden in plain sight with exposed parts. Exposed areas reveal various elements of Unit 2, including the stone wall ramp between Terrace 1 and 2, An altar-shaped rock mound situated in the middle of Terrace 1, referred to as masagit, meaning a place for praying, and diagonally oriented tiles of columnar rock spanning Terraces 2 and 3 in an approximately north 55 degrees east direction. Noticeably, on Terrace 1, the top of Unit 2 lies just a few tens of centimetres beneath the ground surface, as uncovered by the Tango Trench. The interwoven columnar rocks between Terrace 1 and the ramp connecting Terrace 1 and 2 are aligned similarly in the north 70 degrees east direction. This evidence confirms that Unit 2 is a product of human construction, challenging previous notions that it consisted solely of natural columnar rocks. The trenching excavations revealed that Unit 2 is a substantial construction that extends vertically and laterally along the west and east flanks. This indicates that the megalithic stones on the ground surface, Unit 1, are built upon the buried and more massive Unit 2. Unit 1 appears to be a surface rearrangement of Unit 2. In the Fanta Trench and Terrace 2, the alignment of columnar rocks observed on the surface continues underground. Although the trench reached a depth of 3.5 metres, it did not reach the base of Unit 2. End quote. So, it seems that Unit 2, a much larger and more sophisticated construction, lies beneath the visible Unit 1, the terraces, which were likely constructed simply by recycling and rearranging the columnar basalt of Unit 2. The reuse, recycling, and renovation of more ancient sites is a phenomena found all around the world, from Egypt to Peru, and it's something that I've discussed in detail in several videos on this channel. The Inca were repairing and reusing more ancient megalithic stone in Cusco and the Sacred Valley of Peru. There's strong evidence that the recycling of older column bases was occurring as far back as the 5th dynasty of the Old Kingdom of ancient Egypt, and most certainly this practice occurred in later periods. Even the granite of the Middle Pyramid at Giza was being quarried and taken for use on other sites by Ramses II of the 19th dynasty, and the famous Dream Stele, an inscribed granite slab that sits between the front legs of the Sphinx, is made from a recycled block of granite from an older structure. It seems that the same practice took place at Gunung Padang when the last builders came to the site and constructed the terraces that now make up the site that people can visit today. The evidence that Unit 2 is constructed is convincing, and this is an important point that we'll circle back to later when we look at the response to Hillman's paper from Archaeologists. He points out that natural columnar joint outcrops are generally homogeneous in size and shape, and are tightly interlocked, as opposed to the stacked columnar stones of Unit 2, which are made up of varying sizes and shapes, with thin flat rocks between them, along with the use of mortar to tighten up the structure. The foundation or bottom of Unit 2 was exposed by studying an ancient flank collapse on the western side of the structure. This is far from the full story, however, as beneath Layer 2, Hillman found evidence for an even more ancient, shaped and weathered layer that is yet another style of construction. Quote, "We have mapped a sizable ancient flank collapse or large landslide on the west slope. A part of its headscarp, Beta 2 cliff, exposes not just Unit 1 and Unit 2, but also an older unit beneath them. The three layers are parallel to the ground surface. Unit 1 has many rock fragments of broken columnar joint basaltic andesitic rocks. Beneath it, Unit 2 is the interwoven columnar joint basaltic andesitic rocks aligned in approximately north 70 degrees east direction, like those exposed on Terrace 1. The columnar joint rocks, unlike in nature, are stacked parallel to the layer, not perpendicular, and have been regularly cut to about 1 to 2 meters long on average. Furthermore, natural columnar joint rocks are more homogeneous in size and shape and are tightly interlocked, but Beta 2 exposure exhibits columnar rocks with different shapes and diameter sizes, and their surfaces do not interlock directly but are separated by fine-grained mortar. The orthogonal sections of the columnar rocks vary in shape, including hexagonal, pentagonal, rectangular, trapezoidal, and trigonal. There are also distinct thin flat rocks between the columnar blocks, probably added to tighten the structure. Like exposures on Terrace 1, the mortar between the columns has an average thickness of 5 centimeters. The columnar rocks are only slightly weathered, showing sharp corner edges. The Beta 2 scarp is critical in providing evidence of Unit 2's foundation. It reveals a distinct and sudden boundary where Unit 2 meets the underlying rock layer, which has undergone extensive weathering and decay. This layer consists of homogeneous coarse sands with a gravelly texture, possibly originating from a variety of volcanic rock materials. It is evident that this layer was exposed to the air for a significantly more extended period before being covered by Unit 2. In contrast to the homogeneous mass, there are embedded pillar-like structures that contained columnar rocks. These columnar rocks have experienced advanced spheroidal weathering, resulting in rounded corners and edges caused by exfoliation. This rock pillar structure appears to be an integral part of the overall construction. We designate the homogeneous mass layer as Unit 3A and the decayed columnar rocks as Unit 3B. The observed weathering profile is intriguing, since natural weathering typically occurs due to exposure to air and water, resulting in weathering and decay towards the ground surface rather than the opposite. End quote. The subsurface work at Gunung Padang, consisting of core drilling, ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity tomography, and seismic tomography, also revealed the presence of the deepest layer, Unit 4, which Hillman describes as meticulously shaped bedrock. Quote, Unit 4 is not exposed on the ground surface and consists of massive basaltic andesitic rocks with intensive fractures. This characteristic was observed in boreholes 1, 3, 5, 6, and 7. The rocks in Unit 4 are generally in a fresh state or exhibit minimal weathering. In borehole 1, the top of Unit 4 is identified by a heavily weathered 2-metre-high massive basaltic andesitic rock associated with fluctuations in groundwater levels, evident through water inflow during drilling. The pyramid's core consists of meticulously sculpted massive andesitic lava, Unit 4, enveloped by layers of rock constructions, Units 3, 2, and 1. End quote. Hillman's findings on the erosion and weathering at Unit 3 and the top of Unit 4 have some interesting implications. It means that these layers, the shaped bedrock and blocks built on top of it, were exposed to the open air, potentially for millennia, and suffered spheroidal weathering from wind, air, and water over this time, before they were built over by Unit 2. We don't see the same thing occurring to the stacked columnar basalt of Unit 2. These regularly cut blocks still have their sharp corners, and don't display the same level of erosion. Unit 2 is also a very different construction style to Unit 3 and 4, which is essentially shaped bedrock with embedded pillar-like structures that use the columnar jointed rocks. When I first saw the profile of some of these pillars and shaped bedrock, I immediately thought of sites like Karahan Tepe in Turkey, which, along with sites like Göbekli Tepe, are firmly dated to at least 11,000 years old. At these sites in Turkey, we can describe the architecture similarly to Units 3 and 4 at Gunung Padang, shaped bedrock with heavily weathered columns, either formed from bedrock itself or columns that are embedded into the ground. Hillman also found the presence of river-worn boulders, round stones, at Units 3 and 4, which further suggests the man-made nature of this layer, as given the whole site has been built on top of a natural hill, they had to have been brought here rather than deposited naturally. Having established the various layers of construction styles at Gunung Padang, Hillman's team dated them by sinking multiple core drills to depths of up to 36 meters, which retrieved organic matter in sediments that correlated to Units 1, 2, 3, and 4. The results from the carbon-14 analysis of this material are remarkable, and the source for much of the controversy that's been generated by this paper. Quote, the comprehensive Oxcal analysis, as illustrated in Figure 7, provides invaluable insights into the chronological sequence of the constructions at Gunung Padang. According to the analysis, Unit 3 is estimated to have been constructed during the remarkable timeframe of 25,000 to 14,000 BCE. Following this period, there was a hiatus spanning from 14,000 to 7,900 BCE before Unit 3 was ultimately buried between 7,900 and 6,100 BCE. Remarkably, approximately 2 millennia later, the construction of Unit 2 took place between 6,000 and 5,500 BCE. Another significant hiatus occurred from 5500 to 2100 BCE, followed by the construction of Unit 1 between 2000 and 1100 BCE. Lastly, an intriguing excavation of Unit 2 and subsequent soil fills transpired between 1393 and 1499 CE. These refined chronological estimates provide a deeper understanding of the temporal development and evolution of the structures at Gunung Padang throughout its extensive history." End quote. Hillman puts all of the puzzle pieces together in his conclusion. Quote, "Conclusion. Gunung Padang is a multi-layered prehistoric pyramid. This study strongly suggests that Gunung Padang is not a natural hill but a pyramid-like construction. The pyramid's core consists of meticulously sculpted massive andesitic lava, Unit 4, enveloped by layers of rock constructions, Units 3, 2, and 1. The carbon dating analysis further supports the multi-layer construction's long history, spanning successive periods. The oldest construction, Unit 4, likely originated as a natural lava hill before being sculpted and then architecturally enveloped during the last glacial period between 25,000 and 14,000 BCE. Afterward, Gunung Padang was abandoned by the first builders for thousands of years, leading to significant weathering. Around 7900 to 6100 BCE, Unit 3 was deliberately buried with substantial soil fills. Approximately a millennia later, between 6000 and 5500 BCE, a subsequent builder arrived at Gunung Padang and constructed Unit 2. Lastly, the final builder arrived between 2000 and 1100 BCE, constructing Unit 1. It is intriguing to note that during the constructions of Unit 1, Unit 2 likely remained relatively intact and well preserved. However, in a peculiar turn of events, Unit 2 was subsequently buried, possibly to conceal its true identity for preservation purposes. As a result, Unit 2 now lies concealed beneath Unit 1, which comprises simple superficial stone terraces or Punden Berundak, representing the latest visible manifestation of Gunung Padang. Concluding remarks and further studies. This study sheds light on advanced masonry skills dating back to the last glacial period. This finding challenges the conventional belief that human civilization and the development of advanced construction techniques emerged only during the warm period of the early Holocene or the beginning of the Neolithic, with the advent of agriculture approximately 11,000 years ago. However, evidence from Gunung Padang and other sites, such as Göbekli Tepe, suggests that advanced construction practices were already present when agriculture had, perhaps, not yet been invented. The builders of Unit 3 and Unit 2 at Gunung Padang must have possessed remarkable masonry capabilities, which do not align with the traditional hunter-gatherer cultures. The burial of these structures around 9,000 years ago adds further intrigue for reasons not fully understood. Given the long and continuous occupation of Gunung Padang, it is reasonable to speculate that this site held significant importance, attracting ancient people to repeatedly occupy and modify it. To further advance our knowledge of Gunung Padang, it is essential for future research to undertake comprehensive and systematic excavations that delve into the characteristics of Units 2, 3, and 4, as well as their cultural significance. Gunung Padang stands as a remarkable testament, potentially being the oldest pyramid in the world. Further investigation and interdisciplinary research will uncover its hidden secrets and shed more light on the ancient civilizations that thrived in this enigmatic site." End quote. I think you can see why this paper got some establishment jimmies all rustled by challenging the tired old claim that civilization only started some 6,000 years ago, which is still, despite discoveries like this one and Göbekli Tepe, the authoritative date according to the majority of the academic archaeological mainstream. Before we get to the response this paper generated, there's one other feature at Gunung Padang that was revealed by Hillman's work, and that is the presence of what seems very likely to be large subterranean chambers in the structure. Along with trenching and core drilling, Hillman's team used a variety of subsurface imaging techniques to scan the pyramid at Gunung Padang. These included ground-penetrating radar, which uses electromagnetic pulses of radar, polarized radio waves, in the 10 MHz to 2.6 GHz range. When these waves hit buried objects or boundaries between materials that have different properties or permittivities, it can be reflected, refracted, or scattered back to the surface, allowing software to create imaging of the scanned area. Seismic tomography was also utilised, a technique that uses seismic waves produced by the Earth from earthquakes, explosions, or crustal movement to produce 2D or 3D imagery of materials and voids beneath the sensors. Lastly, electrical resistivity tomography was also utilised at Gunung Padang, another subsurface imaging technique that uses direct current electrodes and sensors to make electrical resistivity measurements of the ground. And if the electrodes are suspended in boreholes, as they were at Gunung Padang, deeper sections can be investigated. All three of these methods, along with the core drilling, confirmed the presence of underground voids, likely chambers. The largest of these, beneath the ramp between Terraces 1 and 2, was approximated to be 10 metres long, 15 metres wide, and 10 metres tall. That's a large chamber. Evidence for other chambers was also found beneath Terraces 1 and 5. Quoting from Hillman's paper. Notably, a high resistive anomaly in electrical resistivity tomography aligns with a low velocity anomaly detected in seismic tomography, indicating the existence of hidden cavities or chambers within the site. Additionally, drilling operations revealed significant water loss, further supporting the presence of underground spaces. Gunung Padang is not merely a simple prehistoric stone terrace, but a complex underground construction with substantial chambers and cavities. The GP4 borehole contains crucial data regarding the suspected presence of large cavities or chambers beneath the surface. During drilling, the penetration rate slowed down at a depth of 5 metres. At 7 metres, the drill encountered a blank zone with no core samples. Subsequently, at 8 metres, there was a sudden and significant water circulation loss, exceeding 20,000 litres. After this point, the drilling penetration accelerated and maintained a high speed. The water loss continued until the total unreturned water circulation reached approximately 32,000 litres at a depth of 14 metres, prompting us to halt the drilling. The substantial water loss strongly indicates the presence of a large underground cavity. At a depth of 10 metres in borehole 7, we encountered a lengthy andesitic rock core measuring 1.3 metres. This core may indicate the presence of a vertical structure, such as a wall or gate, as supported by the seismic tomography profile. Considering our goal of drilling directly into the chamber, we contemplated drilling into the steep wall between Terraces 1 and 2. However, this task requires special permission, since drilling without removing or disturbing the megalithic structures on the surface at this particular location is impossible. Results of electrical resistivity tomography, or ERT, survey. The east to west ERT sections, utilizing 2-meter spacing electrode configurations, reveal the pyramidal shape of layers A and B with symmetrical east and west flanks. The ERT sections also provide imagery suggestive of tunnels, including a central tunnel within the pyramid structure. The high-resolution ERT surveys reveal roof, wall, and floor-like shapes. The presence of a long, narrow passage is suggested. The use of 2-meter and 1-meter grid spacing in the ERT survey provides further insights into the subsurface structure geometry. The most intriguing feature is the presence of extremely high resistivity anomalies, or EHRAs. The most prominent EHRA is found beneath the ramp and Terrace 2, providing solid evidence of a large cavity or chamber. To further investigate the EHRA identified in the 2D ERT sections, a 3D ERT survey was conducted, covering the entire expanse of the megalithic terraces on the hilltop. The survey employed 112 steel electrodes, strategically arranged in 4 parallel lines with a 5-meter spacing between both electrodes and lines, resulting in a rectangular survey area measuring 15 by 135 meters. By conducting a 3D survey, we were able to gather data with significantly higher density compared to the 2D survey, as the 3D approach captured volumetric information rather than just a 2D section. The results of the 3D survey provided successful visualization of the suspected large cavities in 3 dimensions, as depicted in Figure 10. Similar to the 2D imaging, these large cavities or chambers were distinguished by the EHRA, but in 3D. The presence of the EHRA, accompanied by surrounding layers of low resistivity, clearly outlined the chambers. The main chamber between the ramp between Terraces 1 and 2 was estimated to have dimensions of approximately 10 by 10 by 15 meters. Moreover, extremely high resistivity anomalies were also observed beneath Terraces 1 and 5, further supporting the presence of additional chambers. Results of seismic tomography, or ST, survey. We conducted 3 survey lines. The initial purpose of the ST survey is to further investigate the large cavities the ERT imaged. The ST Line 1 provides a clear north to south cross-sectional view of the pyramid mound. It reveals a subtle low-velocity anomaly, or LVA, situated between the upper and lower high-velocity layers. The LVA is bounded by 2 vertical strips of low-velocity media, resembling an entrance gate. Line 2, the west to east survey line passing through the centre of Terrace 2, exhibits a distinct contrast with an LVA surrounded by high-velocity materials. It may also indicate possible large tunnels. Another prominent feature in ST sections is the presence of multiple vertical structures, including the 2 stripes bounding the LVA in Line 1. These features are not artifacts resulting from processing, noises, or interferences, but represent subsurface features that likely possess vertical boundaries of density contrasts. Therefore, these vertical structures may correspond to walls or columns of the constructions. Similar vertical features are also frequently observed in the ERT sections, and upright features are visible as the rock pillars on the Beta 2 scarp and the steep rock wall in the Echo 2 trench. End quote. So it's a lot of technical talk there, I know, but just as a summary, by using multiple subsurface techniques, Hillman's team has showed the likely presence of large chambers and tunnels beneath the terraces of Gunung Padang. Not only that, but these chambers have what seem to be fairly regular features, with suspected gates, walls, floors, ceilings, and even possibly columns. Hillman also acknowledges the overall uncertainty of relying solely on subsurface imaging techniques, and multiple times in his paper points out that further work on the site, particularly large-scale excavations, are required to both confirm his findings and to more fully explore this enigmatic structure. That said, the science here seems pretty solid, at least to me, and you might think that it would provide a good basis for further archaeological explorations of this site, as it seems to have the potential to uncover an entirely lost period of human history. Unfortunately, that really wasn't the reaction generated when this paper was published. To understand the response to Hillman's paper, we need to look at some of the history of his work on this site. As I said in the introduction, this work began in October of 2011. It was stopped for the best part of a year during 2013 due to protests from archaeologists. You see, Hillman is a geologist, and I suppose that he was caught playing in somebody else's sandbox, but the archaeologists at the time said that they know the site is around 2,500 years old and that there is no reason for any further investigation. It wasn't until Danny Hillman took the then president of Indonesia, Bambang Yudhoyono, to the site in December of 2013 and explained his findings, and he made his recommendation that excavations get underway to further understand the site. President Yudhoyono gave Hillman his blessing to get underway with those excavations, which, as you might imagine in such a remote area, took several months of planning and preparation. Once he began work in the second half of 2014, there was an immediate outcry from the same archaeologists, as this article from the Jakarta Post on September 24th of 2014 reports. Quote, Bandung Archaeological Centre head Desrel Riva Shanti has taken issue with the excavation process being carried out in Gunung Padang megalithic site in the Cianjur Regency, West Java, adding the process had not followed standard methods that were usually applied in archaeological projects. I've yet to go to the site, but I can judge it from photographs. An archaeological excavation method shouldn't have been carried out in this way, Desrel said on Monday. End quote. She hadn't even visited the site, but was prepared to offer summary judgment about both its origins and Hillman's work from nothing more than photographs. Frankly, it's pretty shameful behaviour, but it worked, as President Yudhoyono, who granted Danny Hillman permission to dig, stepped down from his position the very next month in October of 2014, and his successor put a stop to Hillman's work at Gunung Padang. Those 3 years of work prior to October of 2014 are what this paper is based on. And the truth is, those who have been paying attention to these types of sites and claims have known about the results found here for many years now. Hell, I was talking about this in a video on my old channel, Pukajay Productions, from 7 years ago, and I still have a copy of Hillman's PowerPoint presentation that outlined the same discovery of chambers, the same carbon-14 dating results that are in this finally now published peer-reviewed paper. Graham Hancock, who has visited the site with Danny Hillman, was championing his work and deriding mainstream archaeologists' visceral reactions to it as far back as a decade ago. The sad thing is that Hillman had only really just started his excavation at the site when the work was stopped and they were ran off. That was enough time for them to excavate a small amount and find many interesting stone artifacts, some which are quite strange, like this very dense, high metallic content triangular carved piece from stone that's not local to the area, and it's something that he talked about in an on-site interview with Andrew Collins. In a letter to Graham Hancock on October 2nd, 2014, he confirmed that the pyramid structure was now, quote, loud and clear and not difficult to understand for non-specialists if they come to the site to see it for themselves, end quote. He also reports finding some sort of open hall under 5 to 7 meters of soil, but had yet to get into the main chamber. This is exactly where work on the site stopped, and nothing has happened since. In his paper, Hillman makes mention that they were not allowed to move or drill through any of these stones on the terraces, which limited where he could sink his core drills and where they could dig trenches. Special permission was required to investigate further, and that permission was withheld. Now, when the paper came out, the fact that it reported a pyramid-like structure dating to 27,000 years ago generated some headlines, but the response from academic archaeologists didn't really change from when Hillman was first talking about his findings a decade ago. One of the most quoted academic respondents to the Gunung Padang paper is Dr. Flint Dibble, an archaeologist at Cardiff University, whose profile there states that his research focuses on foodways in ancient Greece. Flint is quite active on Twitter. I think he even tagged me in one of his threads talking about this, and as some of you might know, he has stepped up and agreed to debate Graham Hancock on the Joe Rogan Experience. A daunting task, certainly, and something that Flint should be credited for, unlike certain of his other vocal on Twitter peers, one in particular, who, while willing to speak to the media, was not willing to debate Hancock, preferring instead to limit any engagement to Twitter's, at the time, 140-character post limit. This debate between Hancock and Dibble was originally supposed to have taken place late in 2023, but due to some health issues with Flint, was rescheduled till, I think, April of 24. I very much hope that the debate takes place, as I'll be watching with interest, and I sincerely wish Flint a speedy recovery. Dr. Dibble is quoted in articles responding to the Gunung Padang paper in Scientific American, The Guardian, and in the Daily Mail. He states that there's no evidence the buried layers were built by humans and that, quote, material rolling down a hill is going to, on average, orient itself, end quote. That statement might be true, but I'd love to see any other examples of material rolling downhill that somehow oriented itself into neatly ordered stacks of regularly cut and similar length columnar jointed rock with flat stones and 5 centimeters of mortar between them, effectively tightening the formation, as reported in the peer-reviewed paper. Nature really is mysterious and wondrous, I suppose. Perhaps Flint should consult with a geologist about how columnar andesitic rocks naturally form, or even read the part in the paper where Hillman provides exactly the evidence that he seems to be missing about the buried layers being man-made. My favourite quote from Dr. Dibble was a pretty typical strawman argument, the unfortunately very standard tactic of misrepresenting the evidence to create a point that is then easily dismissed. Quote, if you went to the Palace of Westminster and dropped a core 7 meters into the ground and pulled up a soil sample, you might date it as being 40,000 years old. But that does not mean the Palace of Westminster was built 40,000 years ago by ancient humans. It just means there's carbon down there that's 40,000 years old. End quote. This argument that all Hillman's team did was to date some really old dirt is repeated by several archaeologists, both in newsprints and in blogs. Noel Hidalgo Tan, an archaeologist at the Southeastern Regional Centre for Archaeology and Fine Arts in Bangkok, in a quote from the New York Times, said that, quote, "It's just soil and not connected to construction activity," end quote. He also seemed to be taking a page from recent American political tactics when you just call anyone you don't like a Nazi, and told the New York Times that, quote, "The pyramid narrative has some nationalistic edge to it, and it's backed by a former president," end quote. In this case meaning Bambang Yudhoyono. John Hoops probably needs to give this guy a call for his next pseudo-archaeology hit piece in the Society of American Archaeology Journal. No charge for the tip. The pyramid narrative, such as it is also generally sneered at by archaeologists, claiming that Indonesia has no history of pyramid construction. As Graham Hancock recently pointed out, perhaps they should take another look, as a site he has visited in central Java, known as Candi Suke, that he reported on in his 2015 book Magicians of the Gods, and the site was also mentioned by Hillman in the paper, bears a striking resemblance to those pointy triangle-shaped stone things that seem to be found in many places all around the world, from deserts to jungles. The logical fallacies found in these articles and blogs don't stop there. In most of them, either Graham Hancock or Atlantis gets a mention, despite neither his name nor the word Atlantis appearing anywhere in the peer-reviewed paper. I even did a search. I'm clever like that. Although Hillman has had an association with Hancock, and both he and Graham have authored books in the past that deal with Atlantis, neither Graham Hancock nor Atlantis has anything whatsoever to do with the scientific data presented in this paper about Gunung Padang. All this is an attempt to discredit Hillman and his work as nothing more than pseudo-archaeology, nonsense that can be ignored without ever having to deal with the legitimate data presented. It's exactly the same tactic employed by Michael Shermer in his debate with Hancock and Randall Carlson on JRE, where he attempted to roll Graham up as just one more of the crazy authors in the alternative field and dismiss his work without ever addressing, or in some cases even reading it.
And you've been to Giza, though?
No, I've never been to Giza.
Oh dear.
Other archaeological blogs dismiss the paper's ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity tomography, and seismic tomography findings as nothing more than voids and natural chambers associated with the remnants of a volcano, despite the paper reporting not only regular shapes to the voids, but other structures that resemble gates, walls, floors, ceilings, columns, and tunnels. This same blog also trots out the same strawman bias accusation on Hillman and tying him to both Atlantis as well as some sort of nationalistic pride. Some pretty creative reading between the lines going on here when we're talking about a peer-reviewed paper in a respected journal. Here's the reality, at least as I see it. Hillman, both in commentary in the articles and in the paper itself, acknowledges that this is only an initial step in the exploration of Gunung Padang, and that it needs real archaeological excavation, and that he hopes that will happen. In the paper, he states that they were prevented from moving any of these stones at the site, and they were limited to using seismic, electrical, and radar-based scanning techniques, as well as being limited in where they could run their core drills. The claim that the carbon-14 datings are just old dirt doesn't hold up, as those sedimentary layers are coupled to structures that evidence shows were likely man-made and quite substantial, if not deliberately buried. It should at least form the basis for archaeological curiosity and further work, rather than sneers and derision. Also, this practice of dating soil associated with layers of ancient structures is an established method that's been used without controversy on plenty of archaeological digs. I guess as long as the dates that it comes back with don't rock the mainstream boat too hard. Is this a controversial paper that's making some extraordinary claims? Certainly. The history of science is littered with such examples that have, eventually, progressed human knowledge and overturned previously held truths or dogmas. Or, alternatively, they've been proven wrong in the long run, but with data rather than outright dismissal. In an ideal world, I'd like to think that this type of thing would be embraced with an open mind, acknowledged for what it is, and perhaps form the basis for additional work and excavations that might either prove or disprove the claims being made. Either way, we'd get closer to the truth, which I think we can all agree is a good thing. Unfortunately, however, and as I've seen many times before, evidence or ideas like those presented in this paper that challenge the established position of the academic gatekeepers to the story of history are instead scorned, derided, and dismissed with the all too often utilised label of pseudo-archaeology or with tactics of misrepresentation, ad hominems, or other logical fallacies. Graham Hancock, quoted in the New York Times article, said it well. Quote, "To say not enough work has been done yet, more work needs to be done to settle this matter, that's fair enough," Mr. Hancock said of the recent study. But to basically rubbish the whole thing from the outset and to say that this is a preposterous claim that flies in the face of everything we know about the past, that's not helpful. End quote. The idea that human civilizations might have existed as much as 30,000 years ago is far from preposterous. The last 20 years has seen huge amounts of new evidence that strengthen this hypothesis. Archaeology itself should have been upturned with the findings of Göbekli Tepe, not to mention the now between 40 and 80 more sites just like it being uncovered in southeastern Turkey. If you haven't seen the Snake Bros' excellently produced video on Göbekli Tepe, I'd highly recommend it, as even the carbon-14 dating of Göbekli Tepe to some 11,000 years ago is, I think, only scratching the surface of how old these sites truly could be. In the last 20 years, we've seen the timeline for the human species get vastly older, with the discovery of human remains dating back to more than 300,000 years, and DNA studies, along with analysis of tooth morphology, pushing those dates much further back to the 800,000 year mark. In the last 20 years, we've seen the return of catastrophism and the uncovering of the violent and world-changing events that occurred at the boundary between the Pleistocene and Holocene, some 13,000 years ago, known as the Younger Dryas. Prior to this time, before the massive ice sheets of the Northern Hemisphere melted, sea levels were 120 meters, 400 feet, lower than what they are today. Indonesia, rather than being the archipelago of islands, was still temperate then, if not tropical, and part of a much larger landmass known as Sundaland. This area has been suggested by many researchers as a potential cradle for civilization during the colder periods of the last glacial maximum, and it's certainly got plenty of megalithic sites and mysteries that have yet to be fully explored. Within the context of these recent advances in science, and with Danny Hillman's findings in this preliminary study, the idea that Gunung Padang might in fact be a large constructed pyramid with disparate periods of occupation and building going back as far as 27,000 years isn't exactly outrageous. What's wrong with accepting the data, even if you don't accept his conclusions, and proceeding to investigate the site further with what it really needs, which is large-scale archaeological excavation? Seems like a fairly reasonable conclusion to me. However, as we've seen, that isn't what happens when scientists or researchers from outside the academic archaeological establishment dare to put their ideas forward. As has happened to many, Hillman's work was simply dismissed as nothing more than pseudoscience. Unfortunately, the visceral response from the gatekeepers of history might well be having its intended effect. Pressure from academics has had an effect on the journal Archaeological Prospection and its publisher Wiley, who confirmed that the Wiley ethics team is investigating the paper in accordance with the Committee on Publication Ethics Guidelines, whatever that is. Also, further work at Gunung Padang, which is under the control of Indonesia's current Ministry of Education, Culture, Research and Technology, is not happening anytime soon. Hilmar Farid, the minister's current Director General, said to the New York Times that this latest research is, quote, apparently inadequate to support the theory that this is a human-made pyramid, and that, from the perspective of someone like me who has to mobilize resources to support certain activities, this is certainly the last priority, end quote. Well, there you have it. Is this the end for real research on the remarkable and mysterious site of Gunung Padang? Given the uphill battle that Danny Hillman Natawidjaja has faced in the 10 years since his research was conducted, I certainly don't predict that anything will happen anytime soon. As always, I remain hopeful that open-minded common sense will eventually prevail, perhaps with the next generation of the world's academics and archaeologists who, if the emails that I get from current university students are anything to go by, they're certainly embracing the multidisciplinary evidence that's arisen in recent decades. Evidence that very much should be having a seismic impact on the story of human civilization as we know it, even if it takes a generation to become accepted for what it is. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. And before I go, I do want to give a couple of little updates on things that have happened since I kind of wrote the script and recorded this. I've been having a back and forth with Danny Hillman, Natawidjaja, who has not only graciously allowed me permission to use the imagery that you saw from his paper in this video, but he also made a couple of extra points and clarifications that I want to read out to you. This is what he said to me. It's that there are just 2 comments here of many that people don't often realize when we're talking about Gunung Padang, and this is quoting from his email. First, the megalithic rocks atop the hill clearly show 2 artificial layers, Unit 1 and Unit 2, that we talked about. Previous studies only interpreted just one layer, which was Unit 1, the terraces on top, because they misinterpreted Unit 2 as a natural or a geological rock formation, which, as Danny says here, is a big mistake. And this is the real scientific controversy around this site. Second, Danny says here that the geological rocks of the hill that have been modified and covered by the artificial layers, which are Unit 3 and Unit 2, are only the upper part from the top of the hill down to about 30 meters down. The Gunung Padang is about 200 meters in height from its base, so most of the hill body is in fact a natural hill, which is a remnant of an old volcanic body. That's the end of what he said here, but if I can interpret that and about what I think about it, I think what he's saying is that that hilltop was sculpted. Potentially that's also where maybe some of the chambers have been cut into. Some of those might also be constructed in the work on top of the hill, but it is a site that's actually been built on top of a natural hill, which is the remnant of a volcanic body. I don't think anybody's claiming that this is, a 200 meter high, totally man-made pyramid in this case. As always, I want to extend a huge thank you to everybody who does support Uncharted X through that value for value model. I really couldn't do this work without that support, and it's very much appreciated. I want to extend a special thank you to people that support me through Patreon, PayPal, Subscribestar, YouTube channel memberships, and now on Locals. I'm also shouting out the producers and executive producers for this episode. Several of those people are coming from the Patreon side, so again, many thanks to those. If you're interested in supporting my work through that value for value model, if you get some value from the work and you want to return some of that value to me, be it in time, talent, or treasure, or whatever you think is appropriate, there's lots of ways to do that. It's all outlined on my website. It's unchartedx.com/support. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.